3 months ago, one of my coworkers accused me of stealing from the company. Not a small mistake, not a misunderstanding. He told our manager, HR, and eventually the entire department that I had been secretly transferring company money into a fake vendor account. Within a few hours, my access to the financial system was frozen. By the end of the day, half the office believed I was a fraud. But here's the part that still makes me laugh. The person who accused me was the same person who had been stealing the money the entire time. And the only reason he tried to frame me was because I accidentally noticed a pattern he thought nobody would ever see. My name is Daniel, and I work in the finance department of a logistics company. It's not a glamorous job. Most of my day is spent reviewing invoices, verifying vendor payments, and checking transaction reports. If everything goes well, nothing interesting happens, which is exactly how finance departments like it. But about a year ago, someone new joined our team. His name was Ryan. Ryan transferred from another branch office and immediately became one of the most visible people in the department. He was loud, confident, always talking. The kind of person who walks into the office and greets everyone like they're hosting a TV show. "Morning, team," he'd say loudly. At first, people liked him. He brought coffee for coworkers, told funny stories, made jokes during meetings. Managers especially seemed to enjoy his energy. But after a few months, I started noticing something strange about Ryan. He talked about work a lot, but he didn't actually finish very much of it. He was always working on something important, always fixing a complicated report, always cleaning up financial issues. But when deadlines arrived, his work was often incomplete. Someone else usually had to step in. Still, Ryan had a talent for making himself look useful. Whenever there was a problem, he was the first person to point it out. "Hey guys, this number looks wrong. This payment might be suspicious. This account needs review." Managers loved that. To them, Ryan looked like someone who was protecting the company. But then something started happening in our reports. Small discrepancies. The first one was barely noticeable. A vendor invoice that should have been $4,720 was listed as $4,890 in our payment system. A difference of $170. Not a huge deal. Errors happen all the time. Our manager assumed someone typed the wrong number. But a few days later, another discrepancy appeared. This time about $300. Then another one. Then another. At first, nobody thought it was suspicious. The numbers were too small. Finance departments process thousands of transactions every month. But eventually, my manager asked me to review several reports to make sure nothing serious was happening. I opened the files and started checking the numbers. At first, everything looked normal. Invoices matched vendor documents. Payment dates looked correct. But after about an hour, I noticed something strange. The discrepancies weren't random. They followed a pattern. For example, an invoice might be $3,420. But in our system, it appeared as $3,560. Another invoice, $2,880. System payment, $3,010. Small increases. Always under $200. Always subtle. At first, I thought maybe it was tax adjustments or shipping corrections. But when I checked the transaction history, I noticed something interesting. The extra money wasn't staying in the vendor payment. It was being transferred into a temporary adjustment account. Now, adjustment accounts are normal in accounting. They're used to temporarily hold funds while corrections are made. But this adjustment account was being used a lot. And when I checked who had access to it, only 2 employees could manage it. Our manager and Ryan. At that point, I wasn't accusing anyone. But I definitely became curious. Later that afternoon, I walked over to Ryan's desk. "Hey, Ryan," I said casually. He spun his chair around. "What's up?" "I'm reviewing some payment reports," I said. "I noticed a few transfers into the adjustment account." For a brief moment, his expression changed. Just slightly. Then he smiled. "Oh, yeah," he said. The system sometimes miscalculates vendor totals. I move the extra amounts there until accounting clears them. The explanation sounded possible, but something about his tone felt rehearsed. Still, I didn't push further. I just nodded and went back to my desk. But that night, after most people had left the office, I reopened the financial system. And instead of checking recent transactions, I checked older reports, 3 months back, then 6 months, then almost a full year. That's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. The adjustment transfers weren't occasional. They were constant. Small amounts. $120, $180, $250. Never large enough to trigger an automatic alert. But when I added everything together, my stomach dropped. It was over $30,000. And then I noticed something even stranger. The adjustment account didn't keep the money. Eventually, the funds were transferred somewhere else, to a vendor account. The vendor name looked legitimate. North Valley Equipment Services. It sounded like a company that could easily supply warehouse equipment, but something bothered me about it. So I copied the company name and searched online. Nothing. No website, no business listing, no registration. It didn't exist, which meant someone inside our company had created a fake vendor, and someone had been quietly sending money to it for months. My heart started beating faster, so I opened the vendor profile, creation date, transaction history, account owner, and there it was. The employee who created the vendor account, Ryan. At that moment, everything clicked. Ryan wasn't fixing accounting errors. He was stealing. Small amounts, slowly, carefully, just enough that nobody would notice. And honestly, it was actually a clever system. Most companies don't investigate tiny discrepancies. But Ryan made one critical mistake. He assumed nobody would ever look at the full pattern. But finance analysts live for patterns, and once you see one, you can't ignore it. At that point, I had a decision to make. I could report Ryan immediately, or I could collect more evidence first. Looking back, I'm really glad I chose the second option, because 3 days later, Ryan did something that almost destroyed my career. One Monday morning, I walked into the office and immediately felt something was wrong. 2 coworkers stopped talking when I entered the room. Another one avoided eye contact completely. That's never a good sign. Then my manager walked over to me. "Daniel," he said quietly, "HR wants to see you." My stomach dropped, because that sentence never leads to good news. When I entered the HR office, Ryan was already sitting there, and he looked extremely confident, almost relaxed, like he knew exactly how this meeting was going to end. HR closed the door. Then the manager spoke. "We've received a report about suspicious financial activity connected to your account." For a moment, I just stared at them. Then Ryan spoke. "I noticed unusual adjustment transfers in the payment system," he said calmly. "And they all appear to be connected to Daniel's login." The room went silent. Because at that moment, I realized exactly what Ryan had done. He knew I was getting close to discovering the fake vendor account. So instead of waiting for me to report him, he reported me first. He wasn't just stealing money anymore. He was trying to frame me for the entire scheme. And the worst part? The system logs actually showed my account approving several adjustment transfers. Ryan had somehow linked my credentials to the transactions. For a moment, I realized something terrifying. If I couldn't prove what he was doing, I might actually lose my job. But what Ryan didn't know was that his plan had one very small flaw. A flaw so tiny he probably never even noticed it. But that tiny mistake was about to destroy everything he had built. When Ryan accused me in that HR meeting, he probably thought the story was already over. From his perspective, it was perfect. He reported me first. He framed the narrative, and now the investigation would focus on my account instead of his. But there was one thing Ryan clearly didn't understand. When a finance department investigates fraud, they don't just check one person. They check everything, every account, every vendor, every transaction. And that was the nightmare Ryan had just created for himself. The HR manager started asking questions. "How long have you noticed these transactions?" she asked Ryan. Ryan leaned back in his chair like he was explaining something obvious. "For about a week," he said. "I noticed the adjustment transfers and thought they looked suspicious." I almost laughed, because I knew that was a lie. Ryan had been doing those transfers for almost a year, but instead of arguing, I stayed calm. I knew something he didn't, and the more he talked, the more mistakes he would make. HR then turned to me. "Daniel, do you have anything you'd like to explain about these transactions?" For a moment, the room was silent. Ryan looked at me with a small smile, like he expected me to panic. Instead, I simply said, "I think we should run a full audit of the adjustment account." Ryan's smile faded slightly, just for a second. Then he nodded. "Sure," he said quickly. "That's exactly what I was going to recommend." But I noticed something important. He said it too fast, almost like he didn't want to appear nervous. And that was the moment I realized something. Ryan believed he had already covered his tracks. He thought the evidence was gone. But he had made a critical mistake, because even though transactions can be edited or moved in financial systems, the system logs cannot be erased, and Ryan clearly hadn't thought about that. The HR meeting ended with one decision. The company would launch a full financial audit. Finance management, IT security, and HR would all review the transaction history. Ryan walked out of the meeting looking confident, almost arrogant, like he had just eliminated a problem. But over the next few days, something interesting started happening. Ryan began staying late at the office, every single night. At first, I didn't think much about it. But then I noticed something strange. Whenever someone walked past his desk, he minimized whatever he was doing, closed windows quickly, acted nervous, and nervous people make mistakes. 3 days after the HR meeting, the finance director scheduled a formal review meeting. Both Ryan and I were asked to prepare documentation explaining the adjustment account activity. Ryan looked calm when he heard the news, but something about his behavior told me he was panicking internally. That night, something unexpected happened. I had already left the office and was driving home when I realized I had forgotten my notebook. The notebook contained some transaction notes I wanted for the meeting, so I turned the car around and went back. When I walked into the finance department, the office was almost empty. Only one desk light was on, Ryan's. He was sitting at his computer, leaning toward the screen, typing rapidly, and he didn't notice me at first. As I walked closer, I saw exactly what he was doing. Ryan was inside the financial system, opening old transactions, editing adjustment entries, deleting transfer records. He was trying to erase the evidence. My first instinct was to confront him immediately. But then I realized something. If I confronted him now, he could deny everything. But if I had proof, real proof, there would be no escape. So quietly, I pulled out my phone, and I started recording. The video clearly captured his monitor, the transaction history, the fake vendor payments, the deletion of adjustment entries, everything. For almost 2 minutes, Ryan kept working, deleting records. Then suddenly he noticed me standing there. He jumped slightly in his chair. "Dude, you scared me," he said quickly. I shrugged. "Sorry," I said. "Forgot my notebook." Ryan forced a nervous laugh. "Yeah, just cleaning up some reports." I nodded casually. Then I grabbed my notebook and left. But now I had something extremely valuable: video evidence. The next morning was the review meeting. Ryan arrived early, and once again he looked confident, like he believed he had successfully erased everything. The finance director began the meeting. "We reviewed the discrepancies in the adjustment account," she said. Ryan immediately jumped in. Yes. And based on what I saw earlier, the transfers appear to have been processed through Daniel's account. He pointed at me again. HR turned toward me. Daniel, do you have anything you'd like to add? I nodded calmly. Yes. Then I connected my phone to the conference room screen. Ryan frowned. What's this? He asked. I didn't answer. I just pressed play. The video started. The room went completely silent. On the screen, Ryan was clearly visible sitting at his desk, opening financial records, deleting adjustment entries, accessing the fake vendor account, trying to erase the transaction history. The finance director leaned forward. Pause the video. She turned toward Ryan. Why are you deleting financial records? Ryan's face went completely white. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Then the IT security manager spoke. Actually, there's something else you should see. He connected his laptop to the screen. A system log appeared. Even though the transactions were deleted, he explained, our database keeps a permanent record of every modification. Then he opened the vendor account information. North Valley Equipment Services, the fake vendor, and underneath it, the bank account details. The IT manager zoomed in. Account holder name, Ryan Carter. The room went silent again. Ryan stared at the screen like someone had just knocked the air out of him. There was no explanation left, no story he could tell. The finance director slowly closed her notebook. Security will escort you out, she said calmly. Ryan tried to speak, but the words never came. 10 minutes later, he was being escorted out of the building. But the story didn't end there. Because when the company finished the investigation, the final number shocked everyone. Ryan had stolen over $46,000, slowly, over almost a year. Small adjustments, tiny transfers, amounts he thought nobody would ever notice. But his biggest mistake wasn't stealing the money. His biggest mistake was trying to frame someone else. Because the moment he accused me, the company had no choice but to investigate everything. And that investigation exposed him completely. A few weeks later, we heard the final outcome. Ryan wasn't just fired. The company filed a criminal fraud case, and most of the stolen money was recovered from his bank account. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. My manager called me into his office. I owe you an apology, he said. Then he told me something I didn't expect. The finance director had recommended me for a promotion. Apparently, the way I documented everything impressed senior management. 2 months later, I officially became the new senior financial analyst. Ryan's desk stayed empty for weeks. Nobody wanted it. And honestly, nobody missed him. Sometimes karma takes years. Sometimes it takes months. But sometimes, all it takes is one coworker getting just a little too confident and exposing himself.